quem é que está aqui.
Quando quiseres, eu estou atenta.
Já está no YouTube.
Bom dia. Bom dia. Não vos ouço, peço desculpa.
Bom dia.
Acho que é 1 minuto de silêncio agora, Nídia.
Estamos a ouvir-te, Nídia, perfeitamente. Está toda a gente a ouvir-te. Estamos a fazer 1 minuto de silêncio.
Estamos online, Sandra, quando entenderes começar.
Okay. Good morning. We are back today to continue our Congress, and we will start with Professor Paulo Alexandre Castro. He was already presented yesterday, but just some notes about him. He's a professor at the Polytechnic Viseu, and a full member of the Institute of Philosophical Studies at the University of Coimbra. He has some academic work that are published and can be consulted by you. I will not take much more time and let you beginning, Paulo, your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to you all. I will present a co-authored paper, so I will start reading the paper because it's a little bit dense, but I hope it will be understood by everybody. So, the paradoxical meaning of social world during and after pandemics. The analysis we propose to make of the concept of social world became an Herculean task whose scope still remains to be defined in its different disciplinary contours, and we feel that we were only able to touch the tip of the iceberg. This confession reveals two things. One, that the issue is deep and delicate, and even though we had gathered different thematic sensibilities in this elaboration, this somehow incompleteness in the analysis is still felt. Two, a fair and serious analysis of the social world would require a distance that we cannot give in by virtue of our own condition. We are immersed in the social world in the same way that the fish is immersed in water. But there is still a third difficulty that we have already referred in the abstract, the way in which the concept is used in different disciplines of knowledge, and therefore with different hermeneutical and even ontological implications. However, this cannot constitute an obstacle to our attempt of its description, and in this way reach, if not to a clear definition, at least to the horizon of meaning that guides the essence of our lives. This is the horizon where we are all social beings that share worlds. In fact, the main purpose of this article, of this paper, is to clarify the existence and, if we may say so, the effectiveness of the social world during and after the pandemic. The world we live in requires reflection and critical thinking. Contemporary culture demands commitment and dedication from intellectuals under the penalty of losing the deep sense of what it means to be human in a social world. As we already said in the abstract, the concept of social world still remains vague even after the interpretation introduced by the symbolic interactionism, namely by Shibutani in 55, and afterwards by Anselm Strauss, 78, and Unruh in the 80s. Shibutani uses the concept of reference group, and not exactly social world, based on the earlier concept known as subjective status, introduced by Herbert Hyman in 42, to evaluate, or, and I'm quoting, in order to denote groups that are used as standards by an individual in order to determine the individual's own status position, end of quoting. But just to mention, the discussions seems to start earlier when Cooley in the beginning of the 20th century, in Human Nature and the Social Order, the book, started a discussion close to the concept of reference group theory. The fact of Shibutani had pointed to the reference group allowed the reflexive and critical advance that would provide conditions for its clarification. In Strauss's words, in an early paper from 1978, suggests exactly this when he states that since the early days, and I'm quoting, of Chicago-style interactionism, the term social world has been used sporadically, sometimes descriptively, rarely conceptually. The best known thought brief discussion of social worlds as such is done by Tomatsu Shibutani, who, in arguing the collective and communicative aspects of reference groups, suggested 4 aspects of social worlds, 4 aspects. Each social world is a universe of regularized mutual response. Each is an arena in which there is a kind of organization. Also, each is a cultural area, its boundaries being set neither by territory nor formal membership, but by the limits of effective communication, end of quoting. 2 years later, Unruh seeks to clarify the concept and, based on the approaches of his predecessors, alerts to the fact that there are many phenomena associated with it that can deflect research in its attempt to delimit the field of application of the concept. He says, and I'm quoting Unruh, the notion of social worlds is used here to refer to a form of social organization which cannot be accurately delineated by special territory, formal, or membership boundaries. The term social world is used here to develop a common reference for a number of related concepts which refer to similar phenomena. Thus, social world phenomena encompass that which other sociologists have referred to as occupational contact networks, invisible colleagues, behavior systems, activity systems, and subcultures, end of quoting. It seems That is a concept that most of the time is taken for granted and still ambiguous, meaning that his use can be at the same time potentially overvaluated or unreasonable. Unruh was conscious about this problematic, as we saw and mentioned in what manner the concept of social worlds was being used, mostly in sociological studies. And I'm quoting, amorphous and diffuse constellations of actors, organizations, events, and practices which have coalesced into spheres of interest and involvement for participants. This is from the Unruh, his work in the 1980. However, a characteristic begins to be read and detached from the concept of social world, the characterization as a subgroup. Authors such as Maffezoli, 96, Moore, 2004, Moran, 2017, use the concept with this meaning, revealing its theoretical and analytical potential in such a way that they apply it to the study of subgroups, such as studies in health practices, subpopulations, youth subcultures, for instance, the social world of surfing, nursing, etc., and even applying the concept as Blackman did in 2014 to study the subculture as a deviance of a working class resistant to the dominant culture of elites. Out of curiosity, the concept has also been used in the area of leisure studies to characterize the subgroup of running and climbing athletes. For instance, the study of Robinson, 2014, and Kapresky, 2019. In a more recent approach, like the one of Vic Health, 2019, it is described as a group of people who get together around a common interest or activity. Members of social worlds may or may not necessarily know one another, but they share social norms and practices, including expectations about how people behave when they meet, end of quote. With this definition in mind, which seems to be the most commonly accepted one, note, for example, that Strauss and Unruh already admit the conception of, if we may say so, subgroups below the level of society. We can say we can move towards understanding the social world application to pandemic situation. Point 2 of this paper, questioning social world and pandemic. It should be remembered the question that guides this study. Can the concept of social world be used in its theoretical and analytical usefulness to describe the situation during and after the pandemic? The issue, as we already said, is tricky. And it's not only because of its implications to the hermeneutical horizon in which this analysis should be done, not only because of the situation in itself, the pandemic, it's not over yet, but also because the concept of social world can lead to a certain type of paradox. Being accepted, the academic meaning, it will hardly apply for a correct analysis of the pandemic situation, since society is the object of study. If used more freely, and given the object of study, it seems that we return to the initial situation, a vague and dispersed concept that can mean a lot or nothing. Then how to judge this apparent paradox? Or if we prefer to interrogate it in another way, is there in this formulation some kind of fallacious reasoning? Like Pierre Bourdieu mentions, and I'm quoting, through the social games it proposes, the social world provides something else and more than the apparent stakes in the game. Hunting, reminds Pascal, counts as much as the prey, and if not more, And there is a happiness of action that exceeds the obvious gains, salary, bonus, reward, and which consists in coming out of indifference or depression, of being busy, projected towards ends, and of feeling that one stops objectively and therefore subjectively a social mission. Being expected, asked, being loaded with obligations and commitments, it's not just being pulled out of loneliness and insignificance. It is experiencing, in the most continuous and most discreet way, the feeling of being for others, of being important for them, and therefore for himself, and to come across that kind of permanent plebiscite that are the incessant witness of interest, requests, expectations, invitations, with a kind of continued justification of the fact that one exists. End of quote. What is being said is that individuals, in their particular way of being in the world, end up constituting social worlds with different particularities. The social games that Bourdieu refers are nothing more than features developed within these worlds. Naturally, we feel the echo of various thinkers in this formulation, from Heidegger, being in the world, to Wittgenstein, the language games. Not that note, please, that an important feature mentioned by all the authors we have mentioned is communication. The intersection, the interaction between individuals takes place through language, through the way they establish communication relationships. What is the essence of the social when applied to our world? That is, to the daily life experience with the others. Or if we prefer, what is the essence of social worlds if not communication relationships? We know that the concept of social world can provide identification and investigation of groups below the level of society, but above the level of friendship groups, and provides means of conceptualizing and drawing analytic boundaries around the social collectivities whose practice are the objects of investigation. I'm quoting McLean in an article for 2021, a fresh article. But is it possible to extend the meaning of the social world to the characterization of society during the pandemic, since they are united by the same problem? This is the tip of the iceberg. The concept of the social world allows a broader reach for researchers who are dedicated to a very delimited analysis in their field of study, that is, to a specific selection of a subgroup within society. This means that there is a specific detail that unites this subgroup. Following this logic, the pandemic society could thus fall under the same type of analysis, since it is united by the same public health problem. But it's not that easy. In addition to the cultural differences that separate different societies, the beliefs and values of an African, an Asian, or a Westerner are different, as we know. Or as said by David Brooks, nobody, and I'm quoting, nobody lives in an universal thing called culture. You want to live in specific cultures, each one different from the others, end of quote. And each individual has its own subjective reality, his personal beliefs and feelings. So the problem about the construction of social reality is not new. We are aware of that, from Alfred Schutz to Garfinkel, from Touraine to Bourdieu. It's not easy to find the perfect explanation, and we still find ourselves beholding at the iceberg, admiring its nature, in the same way that human nature should be admired. One possible solution may come from a phenomenologically approach. The social world is based on the intersubjectivity relationship that unites the different members of a given society. And we know that when a new individual comes into the world, he already finds a social world formed that will make social relations possible. We know it from Husserl, from Heidegger, from Sartre, among others, that clarify the deep sense of man always finding himself in a world. If this is true, and we think it's true, that means that he can, during his lifetime, reject or accept part of what he has received. With this in mind, we can and we will build with his friends, family, colleagues, his group of people, meaning his own social world. What happened during pandemics was exactly this. People that were together in such social worlds help each other, and in some cases extended their influence to other social worlds. In conclusion, in this sense, and with all the things we've said, social world should be understood as a phenomenon of social life, meaning that what emerged from the collision, from the intersection of these worlds, is the different configurations and dynamics that happen between human and non-human forces that we feel in society. This is the true de profundis mysterio of human nature. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Paulo. I think we will let the questions for the end of this core of people which will present, and then we come back with the questions from the audience. Okay, next. I welcome the Professor Jacqueline Ferreira Marques. She's a PhD in social work, assistant professor at the Lusófona University of Lisbon. She's a social worker, and she has been working at the academic level, doing a few management roles, and she has some work published, and also she's a member of the editorial committee of the magazine Temas Sociais of the University of Lusófona of Lisbon. So welcome, Jacqueline. I let you the ground for your presentation.
Olá, bom dia. Penso que conseguem ver a tela, Sandra. Sim?
Sim, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I thank the organization of this event for the invitation of this communication. I greet you all. First of all, I want to apologize for my English. The media is not only the most widely used vehicle for the transmission of information on a global scale, but also the preferred source for accessing it. Consequently, it is today the most powerful way of influence knowledge and public opinion. But their power goes beyond that, and today we can consider it as an active constructor of reality. They provide guides for reading reality, they implement behaviors, create opinions, etc. What we talk, discuss, and think is commonly suggested, but what we see and hear on television, newspaper, radio, and social network. In a way, everyday reality and the social perception of it are induced and instigated by the media. There are a few studies that attempt to demonstrate how the media, strategical, use tools to influence and even direct the attitudes and thought of their audience. Many of these studies situate the media as a fourth state, capable of influencing not only public agents, but also political agents. At the beginning of this century, Tower caught the attention of the working neglect of the relation between social work and the media. In 2001, authors Reid and Misiner, in an extensive study for the press in the United States and the United Kingdom, addressed the relation between social work and the media. They conclude that there is a high number of news stories that convey a negative image of social workers, particularly in the field of children, where they are portrayed as a professional who alienate children from their parents. In 2004, Gibelman presented an article in which he discussed the image of social workers on American television. He concludes that most of the time, social workers appear with negative images as agents who do not need any training to carry out their tasks and as a voluntary activity. This work has been a first approach to the subject. Thought it is exploratory and descriptive in nature. We choose to analyze two national newspapers, Público and Expresso, in their online format and during a period starting March 2020 and ending in March 2021. We start the research with the survey of the journalist pieces. For this, we put the word social worker and social work in the search engine to each of the online newspaper. The online edition of the newspaper Público published 43 journalist pieces. 9 were excluded because they dealt with the international reality, leaving a total of 35 pieces. In the newspaper Expresso, we found 52 pieces, 14 of which were excluded because they refer to international reality, leaving a total of 38 journalist pieces. In the first category, social worker, social work, there were 22 pieces in which social workers were identified as part of multidisciplinary teams. In this work, their role and competence was not specified, only their existence was indicated. The second category includes items indication the social work in a specific situation. The majority present a negative perspective of the profession. 5 pieces. With a neutral perspective, there are 4 pieces. Finally, from a positive perspective, 2 pieces were published. The third category, function of the social worker from the point of view of other actors, include 5 pieces. 3 of them refer to the function of food provision. In another 2 pieces, the function describes the accompaniment. Finally, there is 1 piece describing the function in social prescription. In the fourth category, social worker, social work, and COVID, there are 7 pieces where the work is not taken directly by social workers. 3 of these mention the presence of social workers in epidemiological screening and or survey teams. 3 others describe the integration of the social worker in the community support teams within COVID. And one of the pieces refers to recruitment of social workers following an outbreak in an old people home. The fifth category includes pieces in which social workers take the word, which occur in 16 pieces. 3 are about working conditions. 3 present the lack of resource and the limits of the intervention. 5 present the social intervention in times of COVID, explained directly by the social worker. 2 pieces present the impact of COVID on social workers' life. 3 pieces present the opinion of social workers with a politicized position about social problems and contexts. The collage of social works appears in the 6th category with 6 opinion pieces, 3 writing by social workers and 3 by another actors. Finally, in the 7th category, we include 5 pieces. Of the 73 pieces analyzed, only 90 had the direct voice of the social workers, 3 of which were pieces from the Social Workers College. Most of the pieces, 22, only identified social workers as a member of existing teams or teams to be created or strengthened. It is interesting to note that this situation occurs more frequently in the education teams. This is an area which has not become a field of work in recent years in Portugal to social workers. The items indication, multidisciplinary teams, were all neutral, with not mention of the role, competence, or any other issues about social work. We highlighted the profession was mentioned areas as diverse as school, child protection, hospital, and palliative care. This situation may represent evaluation of this professional field, and it is important in the social intervention developed in the country. The neutrality is transversal to most of the pieces present in all categories, with the exception of 5 and 6 categories. In the second category, where there were mostly negative consideration about social workers, their inaction and recriminatory attitude stood out. Only 2 pieces show a positive appreciation, neither of which refer to the roles and competence of these professionals. One of them is a general recognition of frontline professionals, and the other is a solidarity initiative of a social worker. On the roles of social workers, there are few pieces referring of them. In the perception of other actors, 6 pieces emerged, presenting the roles of food provider, social care follow-up, and social prescriber. We also highlight the 7 pieces that present this professional as part of team created to respond to the pandemic. 3 in screening or epidemiological survival, 3 in community teams, and only 1 a residential structure of elderly. As the research took place during the pandemic, we saw that there will be more pieces in elderly area, but only appear 1. This can probably be justified by the fact that the social workers of this structure assume the role of technical director. Social workers' perception of their own roles are presented in 5 pieces, all of them about intervention in the pandemic. 3 present their roles associated with accompaniment and food provision. The other 2 come from social workers associated to university. The rest of the piece in which social workers appear as protagonists refer to labor issues, the limitation of the intervention, the impact of COVID on their life, and opinion on social problems. We note that in 2 of these pieces, social workers appear as if they have a salvific mission. 2 pieces present the social worker of the other side who receive support. So, 4 profiles of social workers appear in the student. 1, as guarantor of food in assistentialist perspective of the profession. 2, as a representative of the institutions in a more bureaucratic perspective of the profession, and a profile that associated with a state administrative apparatus. 3, as a missionary, as a professional associated to a salvific humanist mission. 4, as a critical and empowering perspective. This research demonstrates the lack of clarity that exists about the functions of social work in the media, and the need of social work to rethink its relation with the media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for this amazing presentation about the representation of social work in the media. Next,
thank you, Sandra. I will now take the opportunity to present Sandra, which is a pleasure for me because she's my colleague at the ASTGL. and she's also a professor, an invited professor at UTAD. And she's a well-known person among us and in the sociology and social service. And she's also the administrator at the European Association of Schools of Social Work. So I will pass the word to you, Sandra. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
I need to put on my micro. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go. So, good morning. First of all, as Jacqueline said, my apologies for my English. I'm French, so everybody knows that a French speaking English, it's always a bad idea. Today I will talk to you about social intervention using the arts in COVID times. It's a subject that I have been studying for the last almost 10 years. I just tried to do some thought and relations between art, social work, and COVID-19, and see how maybe how they may be related to each others, and how much we need art in our everyday life, and also in social work. So, okay. I will start with some consideration that Walter Lawrence already talked about yesterday, which is the implication of the neoliberalism on our life, namely to the reduction of the society capacity to respond to the pandemic. So when we are talking about the implication of neoliberalism in the response to the pandemic, what are we talking about? First of all, we are talking about the change of the roles of the states, the notion of resource accumulation or reallocation of these to the rich, the promotion of insecurity and precariousness, and such policies as the regulation of globalization of capital and labor, alongside policies of social austerity, and which is one of the factors that has most contributed to the expansion of COVID-19. And why? Because it has created a wide global mobility of people and consumers' products, along with a weakening of policies that protect workers and consumers. The cutting of public funds for service that guarantee the population well-being, such as medical care and public health service, as well as service associated with what is called the fourth pillar of the welfare states, such as preschool or support for dependent individuals like the elderly. And these services are of vital importance for limiting the enormously negative impact of the pandemic on people's quality of life. For neoliberalism is and has always been about the free markets and the strong states. In fact, rather than waning in the face of the coronavirus crisis, neoliberal states around the world are using the ongoing war against the virus to strengthen their right-hand grip on the condition of the working class. So, what are the immediate effects from COVID-19 to the neoliberal world? Well, the globalization went into reverse. Long supply chains that were previously on the only rational way to organize production collapsed, and hard borders returned. International travel was severely constrained, millions of workers became unemployed, and millions of business lost their employees, customers, suppliers, and credit lines. And what are the constraints to the collective and individual everyday life? Social distance, or should we talk about social isolation, loneliness, fear, untrust, and the increase of fake news and conspiracy theories, loss of rights with a stronger state control on people mobility, conviviality, and so on, weakening of human rights, mental and psychological health, and the invisibility of social movements advocating rights. Last but not least, places of culture are at a standstill. The internet has become the main vehicle for museums and cinemas and concert halls, but also for education, art creation, and work meetings. Contact with art, far from being a non-essential activity, is on the contrary essential for our well-being, especially in time of crisis. So that situation that cannot replace our deep needs for direct access to the beauty. Pierre Lamarck, drawing on numerous examples from the history of art, philosophy, and medical research, explains the amazing powers of art on our well-being, on our intellectual development, and even on certain pathologies. As the saying goes, art sculpts and caresses our brain. So, we have two brains, a part that captures information around us, that compares it to what we have in our memory and with which we decide to act on the world based on the information we have just received. We act to stay alive, which a computer may as well do. But fortunately, in our brain, we have another part, archaic, that of pleasure and rewards, which make us want to live. Art acts on both. It serves to broaden our state of mind, to teach us new things. It acts on cerebral plasticity and therefore sculpts our brain, but also acts on our emotion. It caresses our brain and stimulates hormones responsible for pleasure and attachment. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endogenous morphine. This is what makes us want to live. This is what makes our humanity. Why the virtual experience of art is not enough? When we contact with an artwork, we reason with the artist who worked on the work. This is called the theory of mind. Thanks to our mirror neurons, our brain tries to guess the intention of the artist. We put ourselves in his shoes, even if he has been dead for many years or centuries. By watching La Joconde, we become Mona Lisa. The work of art becomes a living being with which you interact and which modifies you, which transforms you. Interaction is essential here. How non-verbal communication is absent, as well as the feeling of sharing an artist's experience in a group. So, what is the relationship between social work and art? A look on the conceptual framework. The profession of social worker, as we already here yesterday also, is linked to the social transformation and the strengthening of civil society. The practice of the social worker requires the development of personal and professional skills based on the acceptance of ethical values and principles. Working the abilities of the subject through self-reflection implies, on one hand, a relationship of trust between professional and the people to whom their action is directed, and on the other, acceptance of the deontology and ethical postulates that guide the action of social work. This bond entails, in turn, the improvement of competencies which favor the helping relationship through the development of techniques and the promotion of professional skills, namely active listening, empathy, and communication, key elements in the process of social intervention. Scientific research and professional practice have shown that the difference of artistic expression, like music, theater, dance, and so on, proved to be particularly effective tools with regard to social intervention, whether in the prevention, rehabilitation, and treatment of people presenting psychosocial problems, or in their potential to empower and strengthen the social and personal development of individuals in a community. What are the impact of the arts at the individual and community level? Adapted from McCarthy, we may see that when we are talking about a direct acting, we have impacts at the material health level, at the cognitive psychological level, and the interpersonal. Like arts promotes interpersonal bonds and voluntarism, which improve health, reduces delinquency among at-risk youth. At the cognitive psychological level, we have, for example, the increase of the sense of personal effectiveness and self-esteem, or the increase of the sense of belong and attachment to the community. And at the interpersonal, it builds individual social networks. For the community level, when we have a direct activeness, we have impact at the cultural and the social level. At the cultural, it increases the sense of collective identity and effectiveness, and at the social, it builds social capital by involving people, linking organization together, and giving participants experience in organizing and working with the various local partners. When we are talking about participate at the arts field as an audience, we have some impacts also in the material and health level, like the increase of opportunity for fun, decrease of stress. At the cognitive and psychological level, it increases cultural capital, promotes visual partial reasoning, and increases school performance. At the interpersonal level, it increases tolerance to the others. When we are talking about the community level as an audience, the impact builds community identity and pride, enhances positive community norms, such as diversity, tolerance, and freedoms of expression. Bringing at the social level, it brings together people who will not otherwise come into contact. Arts bring change, at least in four dimensions, which need to take in mind. At the personal, it brings a personal change. We make new friends, be happier, more creative and confident, reduction of perceived isolation, and so on. At the social change, we have a better intercultural understanding, stronger feeling of belonging to a certain place. At the economical level, we have change as the impact on the number of new jobs, as well as job demand, better image for the community for investment capture, increase on the artistic works, sales and wider investment in art programs. And for last but not least, we have educational change with the potential which increase in school performance. So if you still with some doubts about why do we need art to face this pandemic, let me tell you or remind that social work final aim is social change and improve people's life, advocating their rights, respecting diversity and empowering oppressed communities. And arts have the power of improve the individual life and to promote social change, sometimes, if not always, with resistance spirit. To the end, I bring you some reality. I want to talk to you about social intervention with arts. It's called Sonderrua, and it's a project which has been developed at Casa da Música, the music house in the Porto City. And through the arts and professional musicians, the idea was to build an orchestra with homeless people and people social isolated. I did a research about the effects of the arts and their everyday life and their social process and social insertion, and effectively the what I showed you before from McCarthy about the impact of the arts were being able to be shown in this project in each peoples which are musicians in this project. But I want also, I don't know if I will be able, let me see. I want also remind you something about just a second, about what we have, where is, okay. Here. I hope you will be able to see. Okay, let me come again. There haven't been talk of a music pandemic when musical formation were spontaneously formed between members of confined families, neighbors, or private musicians on stage through digital technology. Several studies have demonstrated the importance of music for many people during the first lockdown, including that of McGill University in Montreal, according to which music came first among the activities practiced before talking with friends or the kitchen. In the book Neural Symphony of Emmanuel Bigon and Barbara Tillman, we can understand that music may be taken as a biological necessity of humans. If music has met with such adherence during the COVID-19 crisis, it is because it meets our basic needs to connect with others. Making music with others keeps our brains in sync, and this synchronization changes the social relationship, the empathy we have with each others. The person seems much more sympathetic to us, and we enter into a collaborative relationship. This relationship of attachment to the other is a constant need in human life, but it's accentuated in time of crisis. Synchronizing with others break our isolation, empower us, and give us confidence. That's why I start the presentation with the title, Social Intervention with Arts. The arts make us more human and make possible some intervention with our art to connect with the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for your interesting talk and for reminding us of the importance of art in our daily life. I will now present José Soeiro, which is a privilege and an honor to have you here in the International Congress. José Soeiro is a sociologist. He has done a PhD in sociology of work. He is a member of Portuguese Parliament, working mainly in the issues of labor, precariousness, social protection, and inequalities. He has a long curriculum, and I will just say 2 or 3 books he has written. I will say the last one, Care of Who Cares. It will be a possible translation, right, José Soeiro? Cuidar de quem cuida, Care of Who Cares. The Routledge Companion to Theatre of the Oppressed in 2019 with Kelly Howe and Joel Ball. And I think it's the first one that we could translate as Don't Believe in Everything You Think. Well, I give you the word. It's a pleasure having you here, and let's hear it from you. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure, my honor to be here. Thank you to Sandra, the only person who would make me speak in English about these issues. I'm supposed to talk about labor and care after COVID, so I will share with you some notes on this topic. First of all, we don't know the future, so it depends. It will depend on the choices we will be able to make about these issues, about labor relations, about our relations with others and with the planet, but also the choices we will be able to do on social policy and economic regulation. And the pandemic was mainly a big revealer of what was already there, namely precarious work, the lack of social protection for for a huge amount of people, of workers, the informality of labor relations, the unfairness of care distribution, and the fragility of social care provision. The impact of the pandemic was and still is, because it's not, we are still living it, but the impact of the pandemic was particularly profound among precarious employed workers in non-standard employment arrangements, especially at a time when many countries have spent decades rolling back social safety nets. And precarity during the pandemic have had many dimensions and many different experiences of precarity. For some workers, it was the precarity of labor conditions under the pandemic. I'm talking about, for example, the workers in healthcare, the workers in nursing homes for elder, the workers in grocery and retail stores, the workers in transportation, the workers in the delivery sector that have been unable to stay at home, that had to interact closely with customers and with patients without the sufficient safety measures, without a rewarding salary, and with a huge intensification of their working rhythms, particularly, I would say, in the health institutions, in the nursery houses or nursing homes, for elder, and not only on the professions that were more visible as nurses, doctors, or others. I'm talking also about, for example, the cleaning workers of these sectors. I'm talking also about the platform workers that work on the food delivery sector. But for other workers, the experience of precarity, for example, for those that worked in restaurants, in bars, for cultural workers, for domestic service workers, the problem of the pandemic was that they have been laid off and faced a total lack of social protection. The so-called false autonomous or false recibos verdes, false green receipts in a literal translation, or the informal workers. For example, in Portugal, we have around 100,000 domestic service workers, and half of them don't have any contract, so they don't have any social protection. They are informal workers doing the domestic service work. Or, for example, the workers in the tourist sector. The tourist sector with the lockdown, of course, was one of the main sectors that have to face the difficulties of the lockdown of the economy. And many workers in the tourist sector are informal workers or workers in non-standard arrangements of work, such as this false autonomous work or others. And these workers couldn't be able to accede to social benefit because they lost their job, but they didn't have the status of unemployed. So they couldn't benefit from the layoff programs because they didn't have a contract. They couldn't benefit from the social support for unemployed because their contract ended, but they had a precarious contract, so they didn't have the time that is demanded to accede to the social benefits. And many self-employed workers, independent contractors, gig workers, freelancers have been facing unemployment without being laid off, but with their contracts that got unrenewed, and with huge risks of unfair treatment and overexploration. A third experience of the pandemic, I would say, is this experience of the migrant workers. For example, in Portugal, we had a big discussion about this in the agricultural sector. Workers that are invisible workers, and it seems they were only discovered in the public space when they became a so-called health problem because of the pandemic. We have still in our societies in the 21st century many phenomena of modern slavery, chains of subcontractors and outsourcing that explore migrant workers in general, but migrant workers with their fragility also on their citizenship status, but also these workers were exploited not only by the chains of subcontractors, but also by the house tenants that don't provide them the adequate housing conditions, but charge them with big demand from them, big amount of money, so that they have access to a place where they can sleep and make their life. Third point is I want to stress, to emphasize, is that precarious work is not only a matter of labor. The effects of precarious work have many other dimensions. Precarious work means a higher risk of exposure to and infection with the COVID-19. Precarious employment have an effect on workers' mental, physical, and socio-economic well-being. And precarious work exponentiates all other social disparities and discriminations related with race and or ethnicity, with gender, with sexuality, with class, of course. Also, I would like to stress that, of course, precarious work didn't appear with the pandemic. Job insecurity is a structural and a broad structural trend in the last decades worldwide, and a broad movement in which a similar reform agenda has been set in motion on an international scale. And a country like Portugal experienced this phenomenon in a particular way, because this structural trend to precarization of labor, of jobs, sums up with the asymmetry of the development patterns in our territory and the inequality of this development in territorial terms, with the structural weakness of the economy of Portuguese economy, and with the historical weight in Portugal, not only in Portugal, of course, but now I'm talking about Portugal, with the historical weight of the informal economy, which means that this process of precarization over the last decades, but that was more visible with the pandemic and with stronger consequences with the pandemic, it operated both through the changes in labor regulation, so with the changes in the law that allows these precarious modalities of labor, but also and strongly, and this is very important, through social practices that go far beyond what is legally defined, which means that precarization in Portugal is mainly an issue of law infringement. I don't know if this word exists in English. I'm talking about undeclared work. I'm talking about the dissimulation of employment contracts via the false autonomous work. I'm talking about the abuse far beyond what the law allows in short-term contracts and for permanent needs. I'm talking about the so-called false outsourcing. I'm talking about the Uberization, more recently, the Uberization of labor through digital platforms. And I would like to take a little time to talk about this issue of the platform workers. Many labels have been used to describe this phenomenon: gig economy, collaborative economy, on-demand economy, crowd employment. But mainly my topic here is that the platform economy gives rise to questions concerning the application of the legal frameworks in what concerns labor, and it blurs the boundaries between profession and non-professional service provision, between employed and self-employed workers. And digital platforms have been arguing that they don't have any contractual responsibilities with workers and have been opposing to employment contracts. And the employment and the platform workers, I'm talking about the Uber drivers, but also the Uber Eats food deliverers or Glovo or any other platforms. But these platform workers, without any contract, they cannot avail the rights and benefits of employment law. And I'm talking about basic things like working time. We have been reported of people that work 14 hours a day in their bicycles delivering food. They don't have access to any rules about remuneration, minimum wages or others, about leaves, about training, about protection in case of accident or protection in case of unemployment. But also they don't have any access to collective rights such as freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining, the right to take collective action. There's a big problem of this model of business, using the words of the platforms. This model of business of the digital platforms is the problem of social, the total lack of social protection of these workers that are essential workers that were made more visible with the pandemic. But the solution to this lack of social protection is not only to work on the social protection, but also to work on the labor regulation of these workers. And this is a huge discussion in many countries. There have been recent jurisprudential decisions in the United Kingdom, in the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, recognizing the labor contracts of the Uber drivers, in the Supreme Court of Spain, recognizing labor contracts for Glovo drivers, for food deliveries, and this it's a big debate that we also have to do it in Portugal. Also in Italy, there were decisions about this issue. Secondly, and focusing more about care, and there is also a problem with care, because care work, both paid and unpaid care work, is crucial to life. Without care, our life collapses, our social world collapses, before and after COVID. And care, since we are born until we die, we need care. We are interdependent from each other. We depend on others to eat, to have our clothes, to have our space cleaned, to our emotional support, but also to support the more physically dependent people. For example, people with illnesses, elder people, people with disabilities, people with neurological and dementia pathologies. We depend on care. And care is at the same time very invisible, socially invisible. And when it is paid, most of care is not paid. 80% of care in Portugal is unpaid. It's informal care. But even when care is paid, it's very low paid. And it's not at all distributed in a fair way between men and women and among classes. The majority of care work is undertaken by unpaid carers, mostly women, of course, mostly women and girls. And paid care work is a key factor in determining both whether women enter into and stay in employment and the quality of the jobs they perform. But the pandemic made all of this worse. I mean, the closing of social services, but also the telework in accumulation with family responsibilities was a huge burden for carers and a huge burden mainly for women. In Portugal, we are a country with a very low provision of formal care. To give just a figure, only 13% of the older people have access to formal care, 13%. 80% of care, the care that is undertaken, that is provided, it's informal, unpaid care. We don't have a public system of care provision, and in our legal framework, in fact, care it's charged, it's imputed to families, at first to families, not to the community or to the state, or when it is not performed by families, it is externalized to the social private sector. We don't have a public policy of care provision, of public care provision. We have formal care provision that is externalized by the state to the social private sector or to the families, to the familialist regime of care. And also the models of formal care are very determined by the biomedical and very framed, if we want, by the biomedical model of care and support, and are very framed by the idea of the institutionalization and the lack of autonomy of dependent people when they are living in institutions such as nursing homes. And we also have a problem of the clandestine care provision. For example, in what relates with the elder people, we estimate that we have 35,000 elders living in clandestine nursing homes, which means that they live in social institutions that are not legal, and about which we don't have an idea on the conditions they provide to these citizens. And so to finish, what to learn with the pandemic and what to do. Of course, I don't bring the answers, but I want to share what I think are priorities in this field. First of all, we need to take a very attentive look on the labor regulation, both to correct imbalances that come from the past, but also to answer to new realities of the labor world, of the world of labor, such as the platform workers that nowadays don't have any rights. Secondly, I think we must make a central action on making visible care and essential workers of care. I think it's very important. And thirdly, I think we should make some steps to build a public system of care provision with the lessons of the pandemic, to correct the current deficits in care provision, and to assure a quality of care that can face this severe and unsustainable care crisis that we are facing, and all the inequalities that are born from the lack of social protection and from the lack of a social provision of care that is more fair, that distributes care, that recognizes care, and that recognizes, of course, all the work that is done and the rights of the workers that not only work to live, but to make others live and to make others be able to have their life and to have their well-being. Thank you very much, Paulo and Sandra and others.
Thank you, José Soeiro. It was a very interesting talk, and I'm sure there will be some questions for you and for all the other speakers. So we can initiate the debate now. It's better to initiate the debate now before lunch, okay? I'm just saying. Okay, Agostino, go ahead.
Okay. I have two questions, one for Paolo and one for Sandra. I would ask to Paolo something about the conclusion of his paper. He spoke about the, if I rightly remember, about the essence or the nature of human being. So I have a a relative common problem about this this concept. When I speak about human condition or human nature or something like this, people rightly objects me about the risk of anthropocentrism or spacism and so on. So I would like to ask you if you have a solution, if you found a possibility to interpret it in a post-essentialist way, the idea of human nature or human condition. So this is for Paolo. I don't know if I also make my question
Yes.
for Sandra, or
We are talking about social world in human world. Okay, I know it's a kind of Heideggerian perspective, but when I speak about the profundis mystery of human nature, I'm not saying what human nature can be or what is the true meaning of the human condition in the world. I'm just saying that we are social beings. We are communicating beings, and we do social roles because we have these intersubjectivity relationships. So, in this sense, I would say that. The mystery, the profound mystery of communication would be connected with the human nature, because why do I need to communicate? Why do I have this need in me? And so how can it be possible that different persons from different social worlds connect each other like it happens in this pandemic crisis? And you see that the short video that Sandra put it to run, it gives the perfect idea how these social worlds are interconnected during the pandemic. People, you have this experience for sure. I have this experience. I lived a few years ago in a building where there were, I think, 16 or maybe there were around more or less 200 or 300 people living. It was a big building, and people just say good morning and nothing more, okay? Or good afternoon, nothing more. And there was an event with the elevator, and people that were not used to communicate with the others, or they don't want to say just good morning. When this event occur, people get united, and we all see that there were different people from different social worlds living in that building. Okay, so this is the same thing. What happens during pandemic? People from different social worlds are connecting, are intersecting their views of the world, and this is very interesting to think about it. I don't know. Of course, there is a lot of things that I'm assuming here, but it's a problematic question to think about this. I don't know if it's possible to answer in different way. I know that you want to ask Sandra something.
Sorry, I would like to ask something to Sandra about her presentation. So I have a kind of curiosity. My problem nowadays with art is the political attempt to transform more and more art into entertainment. So in this way, I mean, as entertainment, art becomes totally uncritical, so political, ineffective. And this, I mean, this is the kind of art that is common or helpful or useful for governments in politics. I would like to ask you if you have an idea of how nowadays to distinguish among between art and entertainment. What can be a parameter or ideas in order to defend the critical and so also the political meaning of art, to defend art against the metamorphosis in entertainment. So
thank you. It's an interesting question, and I can understand what you are talking about. I think that it's one of the consequences of the use of internet and technologies and the art field. But when we talk about the utility of art in social intervention, we talk about the aesthetical experiences and about it also the political strength that I think that art has always in its souls. I mean, the artwork has always something to say about the historical, political, and social contexts in which it was created. But when we talk about the utility of arts in social intervention, we are not so much interested in these aspects, neither in the entertainment aspect. I mean, here in Portugal, what I feel a lot on the social work field when we talk about social work by art, it's that we have some confusion between art and social animation, animação social, social animation, which is something very distant. It's not the same thing. We are talking about different things. I mean, when you talk about social intervention, you cannot have with art, you cannot go through this kind of approach if you don't have an artist in your teams. I mean, you need this multiple and transdisciplinarity if you want to really be on the art field. I mean, as a social worker, I don't have the abilities to do art. I mean, I'm not an artist. So I need a partnership with some artists to come and bring their knowledge and their artistical souls to my project. I will be worried with the social dimension of peoples which will participate in that social project, in that intervention. And what I can do with the artist is think about how to make visible some problems, social problems, and individual dimensions that may be worked through the arts. And this transformation, it's made by me, the artists, and the people with whom I'm working. Of course, I can understand. I mean, I don't see in the history in any time of the history that any states likes arts or use arts or give a space to the arts, because I mean, the political state and the arts sometimes are not do not agree with the reality view. So arts will put the end and the pain of the state, And maybe it's because of that you feel that the art are using by the political state as much more as entertainment than what is art in this conception. But in social intervention, I think, in my view, we are not in the entertainment conception of using art. And but yes, that thought, I think it's what can guide us to understand the lack of strong of the political of culture and art. I mean, in Portugal, in this moment of the pandemic, the artists have not any kind of support from the states, and they have been quite stopped for a long time now, and this lack of importance to the art field may come from this dichotomy from the political level and the utility that art has sometimes. And if we talk about artivism, we can better understand it. Sorry.
Sorry, I would only add one point. I mean that there is probably in the history from a century, during the last century, there is something totally new. I mean that art is gradually transformed into business. It's also an economic value. For us nowadays, people say it, to give an example, that a work of art is a work of art because it's sold, for example, with I don't know, 20 million euros and so on. So I mean, this metamorphosis of the art into something commercial, into an economic value, has created also a new attractive or attraction or fascination, something for the politics towards the art. So
I'm not sure that it's something new. I think that it's something that comes with this post-Second War. The trade of artwork increased a lot, and so I'm not sure if it's something new. Probably at this time or when we have crisis, we probably feel much more this aspect of the trending with art and the commercialization of arts, but I'm not sure that it's new because of that, because of the history of the post-Second War. So, I mean, I think it's just the history repeating itself.
Okay, I think we should.
Vicente, you want to talk?
I think we should do like Nietzsche said. We should make of our own lives a work of art. I will give the word to Vicente. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Jose, Sandra, and Paulo. I've been listening to everything that you've been saying with such utter interest, and I'm trying to see the synergy across the three presentations. And clearly, I think issues of politics, economics, culture, and so on coming very powerfully there. Paulo, I'm trying to see how what you're saying, in terms of the philosophies, might actually intersect with what Jose is saying, with very practical issues on the ground. From what I loved the analogy. We immersed in the social world as fish is immersed in the water. So much so that we normalize and naturalize it, and we don't know we are living in this world and we are of this world. You also said that we should not believe everything that we think. And I think for me, this is really, it reminds me of Althusser. Although ideology is false consciousness, it is the only consciousness we have. And therefore, so much that is negative that we can see in other people, we cannot see in ourselves. It is what Gramsci talks about, the taken for granted common sense assumptions that we hold, and Pierre Bourdieu, the habitus that so constrains our agency
Yes.
and our freedoms. Now,
Yes.
all that is very philosophical and seem to rest at the very abstract. But for me, I think the things that Jose is talking about reflects that
Yeah.
on the ground. You know, what is
Yes.
it about that frameworks that we carry, particularly frameworks, you know, of politicians and those with power, to leave 80% of women who are mainly women in Portugal unpaid as they provide essential care work? How does it intersect with what's happening at that kind of theoretical, philosophical level? Because I think this is what we're interested in. How do we bring that down to the bread and butter issues that ordinary people can connect with these things? Because I think what Jose is saying is so very,
Yes.
very, very important. You
I
know?
will give the word to Jose,
Mhm.
answer it, because from several years now, I'm trying to be a philosopher. So
Mhm.
it's not easy for me to get on the ground. I'm still in the in the Platonic world, thinking about concepts and ideas. But I think José, it's the perfect person, because he's a member of the Portuguese Parliament, and he knows the politics better than all of us, and he knows
In other
the
words,
reality.
what blinds politicians? That's what I want to know. What blinds politicians that they are not just sensitive to the bread and
Very
butter
quick question.
of the populace?
I think that, thank you very much, Vicente. I think that, in fact, our ideas also come from the social world. There is not an ideal world that is totally separated from the social world. And the history of the ideas is also the history of the transformation of the social world. So about this, the issue of care, we witnessed in Portugal a very interesting social movement of carers, of informal carers, that was able to put this issue of informal care in the agenda, and to force the politicians to see what was already there, but was being made invisible. And I think that the connection between social movements, social sciences, and philosophy, humanities, and political intervention, it's a very productive, can be a very productive one, if we create some alliances between the thought and the theories of care, of the reproductive labor, of the feminist approach to the issues of labor and work, and we connect all this work of reflection with the movement that are already there. In Portugal, I would say that the feminist strike or the movement of the informal carers were had a big importance in making visible and taking to the public space and discussion this issue, and then to make pressure so that the political system, the political responsibles cannot simulate no more that they don't see. And the first step to recognition and to redistribution is to make things visible, to conquer a voice. And I think this, of course, there is a contribution from the academia, from the social sciences, to make this reality visible, and to do so in a way that people don't believe in everything they think, to reuse this expression. But also there is a very big importance of social movements and collective action to give to these ideas its material force, let's say, so that they can transform the world after COVID also, if we can. And that's what I could say about this. I don't know.
I don't know if Sandra wants to answer or give any.
Let me just, Paul, let
Yes.
me just excuse, because I will have to leave at any moment, because I
Okay.
had a vote, in fact, that I need to go and do.
Okay.
Sorry, if I leave, it's I'm
Okay,
sorry,
it's okay.
but I already say goodbye to everyone and thanks to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Sandra, you want to say anything to Vicente?
I didn't understand. I don't know where I fulfill very well in there. After that, what José Soeiro has talked about. Yeah, it's
okay.
It's quite what I think.
Is there any other question?
I don't know, Vicente, if you have a particularly question. No.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, we'll meet again here at 2:15, okay, to hear the talk of Vicente, which will be certainly a pleasure for all of us, and we'll continue with the sessions, okay? So have a nice lunch, and thank you all for this wonderful event that we are sharing with each other. Thank you.
Thank you.